All right, in this PowerPoint, we are going to continue on with CSS, and we're past the introduction now. Now we're going to learn about more specific CSS properties and rules and values. Okay, so in this particular PowerPoint, we're going to learn about the font property. So to begin, we are going to look at font family. Font family always comes to mind when we think of properties for fonts. Okay, so if the font family property specifies the font for an element. The font family property can hold several font names as a fallback system, so like plan B. If the browser doesn't support your first choice, the first font, it would try the next one down the list. There are two types of font family names. There's family name, the name of font family like Times, Courier, Arial, or a generic family, so the name of a generic family like serif, sans serif, cursive, fantasy, monospace. So basically start with the font that you want and always end with a generic family to let the browser pick a similar font in the generic family if no other fonts are available. So an example will look like this. Font family Arial is the first choice. Helvetica, so if there's no Arial, then fine, you can use Helvetica. If there's no Arial or Helvetica, then you can use any sans serif. It's a generic family. All right, so next is font style. The default font style is normal. Italic font faces are generally cursive in nature. It uses less horizontal space than their unstyled counterparts. Obliques are just sloped versions of the regular face, so other values would be italic or oblique. There's also font weight that we looked at previously. So the values would be normal, bold, lighter, bolder. It can be relative, so lighter or bolder. So when you say things like lighter or bolder, it will be one relative font weight lighter than the parent element. Okay, or if you say bolder, then it will be one font weight heavier than the parent element. So the numeric, you can also use numeric values, 100, 200, 300, 400, and so on. Okay, so again, there's three ways to declare the font values. You can use keywords like normal, bold, or relative like lighter, bolder, or numeric values like in the hundreds. So what do the numeric values mean? Basically, 100 means very thin hairline, 200 means extra light, 300 means light, 400 means normal. So you can use either. You can use the values or the common weight name. So how do you know which ones to use? Choose one of the methods. Basically, just choose one and be consistent with it. Either you use only keywords or only numerical identifiers. Don't mix it up. Okay, only decide with one and choose one. It's more important to be consistent. So this makes the CSS code easier to understand, easier to compare. Is bold, bolder, lighter easier to understand, or are numbers easier to understand? Well, some fonts don't have a lighter, so sometimes you can get away with using a numerical value, and that kind of forces the weight that you want. However, you have to worry about how some browsers may not read it. Okay, so you have to do a bit of research on your own before you figure out which ones to use. Next property that we'll look at is the font size. The font size CSS property is set to text sizes. So font size values can be many different units or types, such as pixels. Font size can also accept keywords like small, big, small, extra large, extra small. Also length units or percentages as values. Okay, so pixels would look like this, 30 pixels. It can also be 100% or 80%. Okay, so when we look at absolute keyword values, these are examples: extra, extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. So these values are mapped to specific font sizes as computed by the browser. There's the percentage values, such as setting a font size of 110, also relative to the parent element's font size. So if the body, so I keep talking about the parent, so what's the parent? So body is the parent, right, of the P tag, because the body is always outside and the P tag, like the child, is inside of it. So if the body is 10% and the P tag is, the font size is 150, then the font size would be 15. So 150 times whatever the parent is. Okay. The EM units is a relative unit based on the computed value of the font size of the parent element. This means that child elements are always dependent on their parent to set their font size. The font property, here's another one, is a shorthand property. So it's not a new one, it's just one that combines the following font style, font weight, font size, and font family. Okay, so the short form looks like this, font. So there's no font weight or font family in the property here, just font. And then you have the size, you have the family. So the font size and the font family is always required. They're mandatory. If other values are missing, the default value is used. So if you don't enter anything else other than font size or font family, it would be, the default would be used. Okay. The property in CSS is just called color. Remember, it's not font color. Okay, it's just color. And I know it's hard because everything else is font weight, font style, font family. But just remember that the color for the font is actually only color, not font color. Next is the background color. The background color CSS property controls the background color of elements. So we're no longer looking at just fonts. Now we're moved on to background color. And we also took a look at this previously in our last video. Okay, so you can set the background color blue. You can, there's also the font weight. The font weight CSS property can be used to set the weight or the boldness of the text. Okay, so like I mentioned, some of you were using the B tag in the HTML, trying to use presentation in the HTML to make things look a certain way, and some of you guys were using H2 instead of a paragraph tag because you like the way it looks. Again, don't do that. Instead, use the font weight property in your CSS to make sure that something is as bold as you want it to be. So the provided value can be a keyword like bold or normal. Okay. All right, so I kind of jumped around there, but now we're back to color. So just now, 2 slides ago, we're looking at the background color, and we use the color, the value blue. So colors can actually be specified using a number of different ways, like predefined color names, RGB values, RGBA values, and hexadecimal values. Now let's go take a look at the different ways. Okay, so the color names are ones like red, blue, white, yellow, but you can also get fancy color names like linen or misty rose or aquamarine. So those colors now also exist. You can just type those in. So of course you don't know what all these colors are. You can go to this link here and it will show you the keywords for all these other fancy colors. Okay. Or you can also do RGB and RGBA. If you have worked in Photoshop before, you will know that every color is made up of a combination of red, green, or blue on the screen. Okay, is a combination of these colors, and there's different values for each. So 255 is for the red, 99 is for the green, and 71 is for the blue. Okay, so together this makes a certain color, and you can enter the value for your color using the RGB values. Okay, RGBA, what's this last one here? This is the alpha value. So you can also make your whatever element is transparent. So 0.5 means only 50% transparency. Okay, so you can add an alpha or a transparency to your element in the style sheet. There's also a hexadecimal value, and again, if you worked in Photoshop, if you had taken Art 1177 with me before, you would be familiar with the hexadecimal value. So you can grab that and then put it in the value. Instead of writing blue, you can put this here, and that would give you the value of that color, because every color has its own hexadecimal value. It's like an ID for each color. Now there's the opacity. declaration or a property as well. So just now we looked at the RGBA where you enter the color and then the alpha value or the transparency for it. You can also just have opacity and state the opacity there without having to enter the color. You can do it a different way. The opacity CSS property can be used to control the transparency of the element. This value ranges from 0, so 0 is completely transparent, to 1 completely solid opaque. So 0.5 is 50%, somewhere in the middle. Next, there's also the text align CSS property. It can be used to set the text alignment of inline content. So where your text lines up in the middle, center, left or right. Okay, so it will look like this: text dash align, colon, and then right, semicolon. All right, so that brings us to the end of this presentation. The next PowerPoint presentation will be on the CSS box model, but I wanted to spend more time on it. So today we won't get into the CSS box model, but just a little heads up that everything in CSS is kind of organized into boxes. And then in these boxes, we add things like a border or padding inside of that box or a margin outside of that box, and that's how things are organized. So right now everything kind of looks a bit jumbled up and not very well spaced out. That's because we haven't started using the box model yet. And don't worry, this class I just want you to experiment with adding styles to different sections of your web page, and then we're good to go. And next week we'll continue on with the CSS, starting with the CSS box model.